and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The Kremlin confirms that a meeting between President Putin and President Donald Trump has been agreed on. With a venue to be announced soon, it will be their first meeting since Trump's return to office and comes amid ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. President Donald Trump says billions of dollars in tariffs are now flowing into the U.S. after his August 7 deadline takes effect. He makes the announcement just after midnight on Truth Social, celebrating the new traded revenue. President Trump announces plans for a 100% tariff on imported semiconductors, calling it a very large move to boost domestic industry. He gives no timeline but says the new levy is coming soon. Switzerland's Federal Council will hold an emergency meeting after officials return from talks in Washington over Trump's threatened tariffs. In a statement is expected on Thursday afternoon today, following failed efforts to deter U.S. punitive measures. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran fully supports Hezbollah's decisions as Lebanon considers a plan to disarm the group. Abbas Araghchi says Hezbollah has rebuilt itself after last year's war with Israel and Iran will not intervene. India's Prime Minister Modi says he won't sacrifice farmers' interests even if it comes at a heavy price. After Trump imposes a 50% tariff on Indian goods, he vows to protect Indian farmers, dairy workers, and fishermen, calling their welfare supreme. Ghana's Defense Minister Edward Omane Boama dies in a military helicopter crash. Along with 7 others, including 2 ministers, the government calls it a national tragedy after confirming the loss of top officials and Air Force crew. Thai prosecutors charged 23 people, including a construction tycoon and a Chinese state firm, over a building collapsed that killed 95 workers. The 30-story tower in Bangkok fell during a 7.7 earthquake in neighboring Myanmar, the only structure that collapsed in the city. Switzerland's government is set to hold an emergency meeting today after President Karin Keller-Sutter returned from a last-minute trip to Washington without securing a deal to avoid crippling new U.S. import tariffs. Her proposal for a reduced 10% tariff rate was rejected by the Trump administration, and the president left without meeting Donald Trump or his top trade officials. The new 39% tariff on Swiss goods kicked in, one of the highest rates yet imposed, another Trump's push to restructure global trade. Swiss officials insist negotiations will continue and expressed hope for a deal in the future, but warned that time is needed. Trump, posting online, celebrated the midnight deadline, saying billions in tariff revenue would now start flowing into the United States. Now for discussion, we are joined by Dr. Ajay Dua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and senior economist. Thank you, Dr. Ajay, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now the breakdown in the negotiation following earlier blow to EU on its negotiation now between Switzerland and the US. So what does this signal about the Trump administration's evolving trade policy towards traditional allies?
I'm not able to decipher, for that matter, very few people in the world probably can decipher President Trump. Why does he do a particular thing as he does? In the case of Switzerland, I don't think there is any political purpose because, as we all know, he's using tariffs not merely for economic or financial purposes, but also for political, as he has done in the case of Brazil and India very clearly, and in other countries' cases, he's doing it for the deficit of American trade vis-a-vis them. So, to my mind, the case of Switzerland is one which is non-political in that sense. And the justification given by President Trump yesterday when asked was that the US has a $40 billion deficit in trade with Switzerland. Hence, he's trying to correct it by imposing this very high 39% tariff. I think Switzerland is not going to take it lying down and should not also, because the Swiss economy is now will get contrasted in terms of competitiveness, inclusive of these 39% tariff rate, with the European EU, 27 countries of the EU. There, the tariff applied is going to be 15%. Here, for similar goods, it will be 39. Whereas Switzerland has hitherto has a tax advantage. Both we all know in terms of its banking industry having grown because of confidentiality as well as zero or low taxes. Similarly, its high precision industry, its pharmaceutical, watches, chocolates, cheese, all these were doing well, including in the export trade, because of both their quality as well as competitiveness. So the Switzerland stands to suffer, and I was not surprised when the president of that country, along with the senior delegation, senior businessmen and her officials, decided to go off to Washington to see the president, but the president unfortunately couldn't meet her. And reportedly, she was asked to see the Secretary of State, Mr. Rubio. I don't know. I don't think that meeting materialized, and protocol-wise, in any case, it was improper. And she's come back, kind of disappointed, and the high-power meeting or the emergency meeting, which is now been scheduled or is likely to be held right away, is clearly to determine what should be the Switzerland's policy. See, Switzerland has kept away from political blocs. It's been non-aligned for for decades altogether, including in the Second World War. It has tried to play a financial and an economic contribution to the world by providing banking facilities of a very high order, and all its products, including pharmaceutical, are known for quality, and quality, standardization, all that flows from there. So I don't think there is any reason to be upset about what Switzerland is doing. Switzerland is trying to protect its own interests. That's what the delegation led by the president was seeking from President Trump.
And Dr. Ajay, with the 39% tariff now in effect, what are the likely immediate and long-term economic repercussions to Switzerland?
I think on the product side, Switzerland will certainly suffer. Switzerland, but also, I'm trying to distinguish between merchandise and services. Switzerland, US especially citizens, in a much larger manner than what it was making in the export of merchandise goods. So it wasn't an imbalanced trade as such if you look at goods and services combined. The question is now whether it would continue to receive the services, encourage them or not, it would have to see from a different prism altogether. And of course, it will not be able to stand the competition of other countries for similar products as it was exporting to the US, even though they did have an identity about themselves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajay Dua, for joining us today and sharing your insight. Now we move on to our next news. In Jerusalem, Israel's Security Cabinet is set to convene this evening to deliberate on future military plans for Gaza amid escalating international criticism over the worsening humanitarian crisis in the besieged territory. Reports suggest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may seek approval to expand operations, particularly in areas where Israeli hostages are believed to be held. The meeting follows fresh evacuation orders in Gaza City and Khan Yunis, signaling a potential intensification of ground combat. Tensions have also emerged between political leaders and Military Chief Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who is reportedly opposed to a full reoccupation of Gaza. Meanwhile, aid efforts remain critically insufficient. The United Nations warns famine is unfolding, with only a fraction of the needed 600 daily aid trucks allowed to enter. Now we are joined by Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He's an international relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University and senior fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Thank you. So what clearly defined political outcome justifies a full-scale IDF advance into the remaining areas of Gaza?
Well, the answer is very simple. Hamas has not yet been completely defeated. Hamas still holds Israeli hostages. And since Hamas has rejected all the offers for a ceasefire and a compromise, which have been submitted by the United States, by Qatar, and by Egypt, we are at this point at a dead end where our hostages are still held by Hamas, where Hamas has not laid down its arms, and therefore the two main goals of the war have not yet been achieved. As long as Hamas refuses to sign a ceasefire, Israel has no other choice but to pursue the war and to attain its targets, which are, as I said, to liberate its hostages and to force Hamas to lay down its arms. Unfortunately, Hamas has been encouraged in hardening its position by the announcement by certain countries such as France and the UK to recognize a Palestinian state before an Israeli victory, and that is pushing Israel to an additional military operation.
And Doctor, now, how would you measure success 6 months on from now?
Well, as I said, success means achieving Israel's war aims, which are to return our hostages and to defeat Hamas. After that, of course, the next stage will be to rebuild the Gaza Strip and to establish a government that will be dedicating to improving the lives of its citizens instead of building a war machine directed at Israel. And this will require, of course, the cooperation of allies, both international allies and regional allies, what is called the day after. But in order to discuss the day after, we have to discuss the day of today, which is the need to return our hostages, to force Hamas to lay down its arms, and only after that will it be possible to rebuild Gaza in coordination with reliable regional partners.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Please stay with us as we move on to our next news. In a humanitarian effort coordinated by Jordan and the World Health Organization, 15 Gazan children suffering from war-related injuries and diseases were evacuated to Jordan on Wednesday for urgent medical treatment. Alongside them, 43 family members were also transported. A mother recounted how a bomb landed next to her home. Let's listen into what she has said.
الإصابة كانت عبارة عن قصف بجنب بيتنا، قصف بجنب بيتنا، والغرفة اللي كانوا نايمات فيهم البنات، عندي 4 بنات مصابات، فهم تضرروا في ليلتها، يعني طلناهم من تحت الردم يعني بألف عافية. البنت هذه المصابة هي الصغيرة اللي نال لها الحظ انها تيجي وتكمل علاجها. هناك مستشفيات بتقدم لك اوكي، الحمد لله كان وضعها أسوأ من هيك، والمستشفيات حاولت بقدر جهدها وبقدر الامكانيات الضئيلة الموجودة، يعني حاولوا يوصلوا للدرجة هذه، بس الحمد هلا بدها تكملة العلاج في الحمد لله المملكة الأردنية سمحت انها تكمل علاج البنت، واتمنى انه باقي المصابات عندي في الدار كسور في الظهر.
Jordan's King Abdullah II announced earlier this year that the country is prepared to receive up to 2,000 Palestinian children from Gaza for medical care, with 439 children already treated in Jordan to date. Meanwhile, the ongoing conflict has caused devastating casualties. Gaza's health authorities report over 61,000 deaths and more than 150,000 injuries among Palestinians as the blockade and violence continue. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Emmanuel Navon. He's an international relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University and senior fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you, Doctor, for staying with us now. Now, Jordan says it can process 200 children, but Israel has cleared barely 7% of that. What specific intelligence justifies keeping the remaining 1,850 patriotic cases within the war zone?
Well, I'm not sure this information has been confirmed, but it is a fact that Israel has been enabling the transportation of patients who are in need of treatment outside of the Gaza Strip. Of course, most of the hospitals there have been destroyed because they were used by Hamas for military purposes and therefore became legitimate and legal military targets. And with regard to the humanitarian aid, contrary to what your report claimed before, Israel has been in fact supplying a huge amount of humanitarian aid, much of which has not been distributed by the UN agencies, and a lot of it, of course, has been looted by Hamas. So Israel is doing its best to conduct this just war within the constraints of international humanitarian law. But unfortunately, we're facing a very cynical and cruel organization, a terrorist organization called Hamas. And at the end of the day, Hamas is the one responsible for all the suffering, including the medical cases in the Gaza Strip.
And Doctor, now under Article 50, an occupying power must facilitate care for children. So what legal rationale allows Israel to delay transfers that Jordan and who have already approved?
As I said, this claim that there is a delay has not been confirmed. This is claimed by Jordan, which is not an objective side in this conflict. Obviously, Israel is trying its best to enable the transport of those who need medical treatment. There's no reason not to allow it, unless, of course, there are security issues. But we are in the middle of a war, and it is not always easy to conduct a war and at the same time enable all the patients who need treatment outside of Israel. But as I said, Israel is doing its best in order for this to happen.
Thank you, Doctor, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay in the region. Now, Turkey has raised concerns over the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. It says that the SDF group is not complying with a deal to integrate into Syria's state institutions. Following the recent clashes between the SDF and Syrian troops near Manbij and Aleppo, a Turkish defense source has warned that this might damage Syria's unity. That same Turkish source has also linked the group's growing assertiveness to earlier fighting between the Druze and Bedouin factions in southern Syria. Subsequently, Ankara considers the US-backed SDF a terrorist organization and insists it must disarm under the agreement. That agreement was signed earlier this year between the SDF and the government in Damascus, which is Syria's capital and also the seat of President Bashar al-Assad's regime. However, many Syrian Kurds have earlier reacted with caution. They fear that the deal could strip them of the autonomy they have maintained during the civil war. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dr. Emmanuel Navon. Thank you, Doctor, for staying with us. Now, what are the key obligations for both SDF and the Syrian government under the integration deal signed earlier this year?
But you're talking about the deal with the Syrian government?
Yes, and SDF.
So we have to understand that in Syria, there is a new government, a new president, who himself is a former jihadist, there was a bounty on him by the U.S. government. He was recognized as a terrorist And therefore, even though Israel is trying to establish a new relation with Syria, which is definitely different, the new regime is different from the former one, the Assad regime, which was completely aligned with Russia and with Iran. But I think we have very good reasons, as I said, to be skeptical about the new Syrian government, which, by the way, only very recently has encouraged the massacre and murder of the Druze minority in Syria. And the Druze minority has been protected by Israel. The Druze would like to come under Israeli sovereignty. There's a very large Druze population in Israel, and they serve in the army. They have senior position in the government, and it is Israel who's protecting them in Syria from the mass violence and massacres that are very often encouraged by the Syrian government. So the new agreement is meant to protect this population, but if it wasn't for Israel, there would be no protection for it.
And Doctor, now what are the principal fears among Syrian Kurds regarding their autonomy if the deal is fully implemented?
So the Kurds have been aspiring to autonomy for decades, and they are entitled to it because the Kurds actually are a nation, they are a people, and therefore they are entitled to self-determination according to international law. Unfortunately, because of the cynical cooperation between Syria, Iran, and Turkey, their independence has been denied. But I think that the Kurds, especially in northern Iraq, have been very strong allies of Israel over the years. And unfortunately, I doubt that the current regime in Syria will actually grant them any type of autonomy. But we have to understand that at the end of the day, Syria is a failed state. It has been dismembered de facto by years of civil war, and therefore the Kurds should have their autonomy, should have their self-rule, and they deserve the support of the international community to achieve that goal.
And Doctor, now if the integration process falters, what are the potential implications for broader security in northern and eastern Syria?
Well, there is no security in eastern Syria. Syria is one of the most unstable and violent countries in the world. It is occupied in its northern part by Turkey, and it is also under the influence of foreign powers, especially Russia, and until recently Iran, until the fall of the Assad regime. So there is unfortunately no security and no stability in Syria. Syria is a source of violence in the region. It has been bled by civil war for over a decade, with hundreds of thousands dead, millions of refugees. So there is actually no stability and security in that country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emmanuel Namon, for joining us from Tel Aviv and sharing your insight. Thank you. Now we move on to Europe. The UK has begun detaining migrants under its new returns deal with France, aimed at tackling illegal channel crossings. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed that the first detentions took place on Wednesday. Those held will be kept in immigration removal centers before being returned to France in the coming weeks. Under the pilot scheme, running until June 2026, adults and accompanied minors arriving by small boat can be sent back to France. In exchange, the UK will accept approved asylum seekers from France as long as they have not previously tried to enter illegally. The Home Office says referrals to France will be made within 3 days of arrival, with responses expected within 14 days. A legal application route is now open for those in France, but strict criteria apply. If approved, they'll have 3 months to claim asylum or apply for a visa in the UK, but without access to work, study, or benefits. Now we're joined by Joshua Barnes. He's our anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this situation?
Well, yes, absolutely. Asuma, the situation surrounding migration is a key talking point and topic of contention in both France and the United Kingdom. A rise of far-right politics with immigration a key talking point and a key buzz theme in both countries. A lot of Europe is questioning migration, both illegal and illegal, in the face of rising costs of living and lowering living standards. Migration is a key point. Of course, the United Kingdom and France separated by the English Channel. This is a key point of crossing for migrants who have travelled across Europe and then are looking to enter the United Kingdom. These crossings are dangerous. Often deaths are reported because of overcrowding on cheap-made dinghies and cheap boats that aren't necessarily fit for this purpose. It is a topic that needs addressing from both governments. Keir Starmer, of course, in a Labour government that is now more than a year into the job, facing criticism, and migration is a key point. We've seen a shift from Keir Starmer, definitely a more hardline stance and response on migration, following the popularity of figures like Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, who have done well in recent local elections. In France as well, the rise of far right politically is a big move. Someone like Marine Le Pen was potentially slated as the upcoming president until her situation legally in France. But migration is a key talking point. It's a buzz topic, and this is a move from both countries trying to look at resolving that issue, maybe only just on the surface, with thousands, tens of thousands potentially entering each year illegally between France and the UK, but it is a step forward and will be a win for both governments that they can take back to their respective countries.
Thank you very much. That indeed, yes, it does not solve the problem in fundamental. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.